Hi everyone, my name is Carlos Morales. I'm a former Child Protective Services investigator, and this is the case against and the truth about Child Protective Services. All stats, studies, and resources can be found at truthovercomfort.net. Child Protective Services, also known as CPS, is the name of a governmental agency that responds to reports of child abuse or neglect. To those who are not quite acquainted with the agency, it should be understood that according to CPS and every state in America, the child does not belong to the parent. They actually belong to the state. You see, CPS is actually given the power by law to ignore or reject the 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, and 14th Amendment in their proceedings, which is quite a bit of power, but as long as they're positive results that actually prevent the abuse of kids, then shouldn't they be allowed to do it? Well, what first must be understood is who are these investigators working for CPS. An investigator, first of all, must be able to have an understanding of child development, forensics, training to see if a bruise came from a fall or a punch, a thorough understanding of dispute resolution in order to ensure their safety and the safety of the child, and keen insight into psychology in order to interpret fact from fiction while interviewing parents in hostile situations. In order to gather, develop, and train in all of this information, what would essentially amount to years in college in each particular subject, is all condensed into 2 months of training, much of which is spent being taught that all parents are abusers and the development of an us versus them cultural mentality. Now that's the investigator. Now, on to how a case opens. A call is made to CPS headquarters of an alleged abuse. Now, the caller can be anonymous or they can state their actual name. But due to CPS bylaws, the alleged perpetrator will never be given the name. Those knowledgeable regarding the Constitution may be aware that this is an infringement of the 6th Amendment. Now, the alleged abuse can be that a parent is allowing a child to play outside, that a child is being homeschooled, that the parent owns a gun legally, that the parent smokes marijuana outside the home, even if the parents are legally allowed to do it, that the child is being taught anti-government sentiment. But sometimes, though this is a rarity, it is for actual abuse. Now, this may seem like an overgeneralization or a straw man, but over 85% of all child removals by CPS are not for physical or sexual abuse. The majority of cases I saw were actually for marijuana use, and this is the majority of cases CPS deals with. So from there, a supervisor reads the report, and then an investigator is sent out to corroborate or disprove the claims. Now, since the state owns the kid and not the parent, the investigator can then go to the child's school or anywhere else the kid is, without letting the parents actually know that the child is about to be questioned by some individual with terrible training. Now, public schools are the go-to for most investigators wanting to find, talk to, or remove a child. The investigator goes to the school, takes the child into a separate room, and asks the child, many times these kids are actually as young as 4, for consent to record the conversation. According to CPS, 4-year-olds are capable of consent and are fully capable of recalling events exactly as they occurred. The investigators barraged the child with a series of questions regarding the sexual promiscuity, drug use, domestic violence, molestation practices, and so on that the parent may or may not be up to. The children generally have very little idea of what the hell is going on in these particular cases, and this has led to a lot of authority issues and to countless false allegations of abuse across America. If you want a perfect demonstration of this, look up the alleged satanic, ritualistic abuse that was rampant in daycares in the 1990s that led to countless daycare workers actually being put behind bars. The only problem with these particular cases, though, was that everything was made up by the caseworkers, then fed to the kids as fact due to the questioning practices, which then led to children's and adults' lives being destroyed. No caseworkers were actually fired in these cases that ended up leaving a lot of individuals' lives being destroyed. Another issue that occurs is what CPS actually considers evidence. Because CPS cases aren't just based on what happened yesterday and actually viewed by someone. they can be based off of something that happened 2 years ago, and not even something that someone saw firsthand. The agency actually uses evidence that is based off the memory, off the story stated that someone else overheard a year ago. That investigator, who is actually told to not copy the information word for word, but instead take small notes and then use their own judgment to place that information into a database in narrative form, as in they are told to create a story based off their own memory. This is considered evidence that is strong enough for a court case. And this all gets even more shaky when you realize that in between every time that story is told, biases and false recollections are planted in every time. There's a very simple kids game that demonstrates this, and it's called the telephone game. One person tells another person a simple 5 to 10 word statement, and that message is transferred about 10 times from person to person in the same room within under a minute. And then the last person who heard the message repeats it. That last person always has a completely different story than the original message, and that was just in under a minute. Now imagine this on a larger scale, but instead of an insightful giggle, it leads to the destruction of a family. What makes this telephone game even worse is that the adults playing it have their own incentives to fabricate. For instance, divorce cases, custody cases, teacher-parent conflicts, and neighbor conflicts can all be won or lost if someone simply makes up one false allegation of abuse. Even if the allegation is proven false, the individual alleging the abuse is not discredited in later cases. And the children, well, they're left scarred by questioning practices and unethical practices, and the names of the parents are left permanently recorded into a database, along with, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars spent in court cases that is never given back to the parents. And now, speaking of money in court, what happens and what keeps cranking this wretched agency along is financial incentives. Now, CPS is allotted more money by the state for every allegation that is made, whether it is proven to be true or proven to be false. In states like Texas, they can be given up to $6,000 to $10,000 for every removal of a child. Now, of course, defense attorneys and judges are also subsidized for every child that is put through the ringer, also known as the system, and foster homes are propped up as well. See, foster homes are actually granted more money for every disability a child has. But disability doesn't just mean they're crippled. It can also mean that the child has oppositional defiant disorder, mood swings, ADHD, insomnia, and anger issues, all of which are generally the byproduct of a terrible environment. But instead of fixing the environment, the foster home is actually given a bonus, which then leads to, 6-year-olds being put on 6 different types of psychotropic drugs. This is just one of the issues in foster homes. Presently, there are 397,000 children out of home care, and in foster homes, foster kids are 7 to 8 times more likely to be abused than children in normal households. Nearly half will end up homeless after they age out. They are also 3 times more likely to be put on psychotropic drugs due to the financial incentives already discussed. They're 7 times more likely to develop an eating disorder. They are more likely to have post-traumatic stress disorder than veterans of war and less likely to recover from that PTSD. They are more likely to become pregnant as a teenager than similarly abused kids, and are 6 times more likely to die than if they stayed in an abusive household. Now, we put it all together. We have an unconstitutional and barbaric agency that gets away with financially incentivized mass removals of kids. 85% of them not being for physical or sexual abuse. You have terribly trained investigators, horrendous evidence gathering practices, families left poor just trying to disprove claims, whole justice systems that are financed through unjust practices, and foster homes that drug and abuse children. Now that's the truth about Child Protective Services. An agency whose intent is to protect kids. An agency that exemplifies the saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There's a fitting quote by a by a former dictator that summarizes this injustice. The state must declare the child to be the most precious treasure of the people. As long as the government is perceived as working for the benefit of the children, the people will happily endure almost any curtailment of liberty and almost any deprivation. That dictator, Adolf Hitler. For more information regarding child protective services, foster home, or anything else discussed, go to truthovercomfort.net.